Hello and welcome to The Stack. Hope you're having a fantastic 2026 so far. This week we celebrate 15 years of Delayed Gratification. We speak with the head of editorial content for GQ France and a new Australian title called The Story. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show in celebratory mood to celebrate 15 years of one of our favorite titles that The Stack has been following from the beginning, Delayed Gratification. Described as the slow journalism magazine, it aims to bring depth, context, and perspective to the latest quarter news. Founded by Rob Orchard and Marcus Webb, it's been a success story and an example on how an independent publication is run. It was a pleasure to welcome Rob to our studio to tell us more.
It was an interesting start for us. So it was just a group of us editors and an art director who went into this. And we didn't have any kind of commercial people. And we were terribly naive about the number of copies that we thought that we were going to sell. So we had these ridiculously over-optimistic ambitions for the issue 1 sales, and we fell very short of them. So there we were in this tiny office on the bottom floor of the Time Out building on Tottenham Court Road. And Tony Elliott, who was obviously the founder of Time Out, had very kindly found us some space. He liked the idea. And there we were working away. And by a couple of weeks after issue 1, I was looking at the numbers. I was like, oh, well, I mean, that's it. We're going to go out of business. We're kind of done. And then something amazing happened, which was that we were invited, or my co-editor Marcus was invited to go on the Today programme. So I was listening to him on internet radio, and he kept getting bumped back and back. He was supposed to be on really early, and he kept getting bumped for other stories. And then they were saying, oh, maybe he has to come back tomorrow. And I was getting these texts coming through. And then they finally put him on, and it was at 10 to 9 in the morning, which is the perfect time, absolute perfect time. And in the 10 minutes that he was on there, we sold 10 subscriptions. And that day, they didn't stop coming through. So we sold 400 subscriptions in a day. And it saved us. It was one of those quirks of fate, because in the 2 weeks before, we'd sold something like 6 subscriptions. I thought, there's no way this is going to work. And then suddenly that happened. It was the best business day of my life. It was just astonishing. And then we've had, it's always been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We've had quite a lot of setbacks along the way, but quite often something nice has just emerged to help push us forward and keep us going.
Because it is important, right, Rob, to kind of, to gain new customers as well. I'm sure you have a very loyal base at the moment, of course, 15 years. But I think perhaps it was last year, correct me if I'm wrong, I saw some ads on the tube with by Delayed Gratification. So it's interesting. You have to put yourself out there,
You have to put yourself out there. There's so many people out there. There's so many people shouting, so many people wanting people's time and attention and money. And so it's always been very hand to mouth from that point of view. We've never had big budgets for this sort of thing, but we've got a brilliant marketing manager, and she has, in the last few years, really worked out what works. So stuff like tube advertising works surprisingly well for us. And now we're buying that on a much more regular basis. We're doing radio advertising. We're doing some kind of interesting tie-ups with other companies. So actually, I think we're starting to get our eye in about it. And I think for the next year, the big thing would be to just be a bit braver and funnel a bit more money towards that. Because you're exactly right. We need to keep new people coming in, new people discovering the magazine.
But most importantly, you had a great idea when you launched, because I feel, I listen to editors and even the listeners of The Stack. That's what people want from a title. It's not just about the breaking news. Let's look more in depth to the story. So I'm sure you noticed that 15 years ago. We need a magazine like this that really kind of delves into those stories that perhaps would be forgotten in a way.
Well, I think that's been our saving grace, to be honest with you. So with Delayed Gratification, it was this idea of making a slow journalism magazine. So when everything else was going super, super fast, to take our time, to wait for the dust to settle on stories, and to ask the question of what happened next, which is so rarely a question that gets answered. And I think we were really lucky in settling on that right at the beginning, because it was an idea that people immediately could see value in, which is why we got on the Today programme, because it was an interesting novelty. And while it's always been a niche concern, I do think it's a growing niche, because over the last 15 years, I think what has happened is the speed and intensity of news production has ramped up massively. People have started to become physically sick of their smartphones. They realize how badly they're addicted to them and how unnourishing it is to live your life with breaking news updates on your smartphone. And then finally, there's this new wave in recent years of misinformation and disinformation, which has left everybody feeling on the back foot. Am I to trust this stuff? Who can I trust and so on? So I think in that context, we keep plugging away. This is an independent, non-partisan magazine. We are not interested in coming at anything from a particular angle. We're just interested in finding out what's going on. And we're trying to do more and more ambitious stories, send journalists to places that are not being kind of covered and come back with fascinating insights for our readers.
And I think what you guys are unique as well is the style of the pages, because it is very colorful. It is very poppy, if I may say as well, because some titles, looking, when you see like long form journalism, sometimes it can look quite serious, and maybe, that's perhaps overly intellectual. But I think Delayed Gratification has that kind of light to it.
I think you've absolutely put your finger on it. I think that...
See, I'm a fan here.
You're doing it. This is beautiful. But so I think 60% of any modest success that we have had has been directly attributable to our brilliant art director, Christian. And you're right. It's bright and it's colourful and it's poppy. And I think when we were launching, that is his sensibility in terms of the design anyway. But when we were launching, we were looking at, the big news magazines. And there's an earnestness there and almost a puritanical approach to design, where it's sort of saying that unless you have, just solid blocks of text with incredibly minimal graphics and, maybe the occasional photo as a treat, you're not a serious person. This is not... I think that's nonsense. I think what you need to do, given that we are living in this attention-deprived economy, is pull every single lever that you can. Yes, you need lots and lots of serious stuff in there. You need analysis, you need insight, but you also need cartoony stuff and you need infographics and you need pages where it's just one exquisite photo that you've run full bleed, because why not? It's print, right? It's not the internet.
No.
It's not mediated through a million different systems on a million different types of smartphone. It is a finite print product. You get it once every 3 months. And I think there's something gorgeous about that. You can take your time to sculpt it. Every single page, you should find something on there that intrigues you or inspires you.
You need a movie matrix, right?
You need a movie matrix.
That's what you need, because I love it. That's my favorite part of the magazine as well.
Right.
And it's funny, you did bring issue 1 here as well. So the movie matrix actually did not start at issue 1, but it was maybe...
So it was called the Film Formula. So we've always done... So my co-editor, Marcus, is a big film guy. And so we always wanted to do something. So I remember this. I'd forgotten about this. But so what we used to do was we used to look at every single film that was released through the period, which was about, 90, 100 films over a quarter. And then he used to painstakingly write a formula. So it's this is Jaws plus Nuns minus, Sadness or whatever it is. For each single one, they were obviously much cleverer than that. And then we would give the Rotten Tomatoes score. So he used to do that and it would take him days and days, but it was nice because you could smell the effort coming off the page. And then we refined it. And basically what we worked out was that the best way of looking at films was to look at box office versus critical reception. Because then you've got these 4 quadrants. So you've got incredible critical hits that are also blockbusters that everybody kind of loves. You've got critical hits that nobody goes to. And then, on the other side, you've got terrible, terrible stuff. And that has survived in one form or another all the way through. And I think with good magazines, with kind of great magazines like Monocle and Private Eye, very often the way that you consume them is you flip to a regular first. When you learn the language of the particular publication, you're I'm going to go to Film Formula, or I'm going to go to Movie Matrix over a cup of coffee, and then I'm going to flip to the Evil Stickman thing, and then, there's something longer that I'm going to read that. I think you need those regulars to kind of reassure people to have that lovely drumbeat going through.
I agree completely. And how do you see the magazine for next year? We can talk about the highlights of this issue as well, but, in terms of changes, of course, some regulars will stay, but do you want to innovate? Where are you seeing Delayed Gratification next year?
Well, I'm almost shameful to bring this up because I'm certain that you and I will have talked about this before. And I'm certain I've come in here before and said, well, we're about to launch an app. And that has proved to be untrue for years and years and years.
Fake news.
It has been fake news. Who knew that putting together an app was a complicated thing? However,
it is. Actually.
I'm going to chance my arm and say that we're going to launch an absolutely kick-ass app for all of our subscribers. It's going to be free for all of our print subscribers. And it's going to have everything that we've ever published in a searchable format. You can read it as the design magazine or as an HTML. You'll be able to listen to audio versions of many of our kind of recent stories. And we have a patent pending. We've invented our own game. So there's going to be a game on there that people are going to be able to play. Whether they like it or not, I don't know. So that's going to happen. That's going to be a big thing. And that will also release a lot of time and energy for us, because the amount of time and energy is sucked out of the last 2, 3, 4 years is astonishing. So that's great, I think. And then our big thing, I think, is to really get into some more properly investigative stories. Mm-hmm. So I think we've kind of skirted around it, but I think that probably our journalism has been more kind of explanatory. Like we've kind of brought you things that you kind of didn't know about, but in terms of actually blowing the lid off something, I'm not sure that we've done that kind of very many times to the level that we kind of want to. So I think that's something that we're looking into, and looking into kind of smart ways that we can do that. There are all these intriguing possibilities. I'd love to do another book. We have an idea for another book. I'd love to do a foreign language edition. And actually, that's become so much easier now. It's so much more possible. It might be kind of a digital version or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, but the big thing, I suppose, fundamentally is just to reach more people. Increase our subscriber numbers, and then fund better journalism, I think.
That's perfect. I think a game would work very well for Delayed Gratification.
I think so. So one of the problems that you have with the magazine is because it's quarterly, you're only, people can get our newsletter, they can come to our classes, we do lovely kind of regular classes and stuff, but actually you haven't got that kind of drumbeat of it being in somebody's life. So actually, if you're a Monocle reader, well, do you know what? I've just got Monocle Radio on in the background, I'm kind of enjoying particular shows and so on. We haven't got that. So I'm just thinking about how I interact with the New York Times and Wordle, and just wanting to get into people's days in that sort of same way, just kind of a little fun thing. Oh, I've got the train home, I'll kind of look at that, give them something else. Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah. And finally, give us some of the highlights of issue 60 as well, which just came out on the newsstands.
Yeah, it's a cracking issue. I'm so pleased with it. So there's some pretty serious stuff. So there's an extraordinary, brilliant 12-page long-form story about Colombian soldiers who are being recruited to fight in Ukraine. And we have an absolutely sensational journalist who has been working on this for months and has interviewed upwards of 30 Colombian soldiers who've gone over to Ukraine and talked about what they found over there, what their experiences have been. That's really kind of fascinating and devastating at the same time. We've got a gorgeous infographic explainer on the Euros, so revisiting the triumph of the Lionesses this summer. And my benchmark for sports stories is I don't care about sport at all. The rest of the team really do. But if you can present me with something, if we can be working on something that I really find interesting and I do find this fascinating, then that's, that I know that other people are going to love it as well. We've done a big story much closer to home about shoplifting. So one of our best journalists has been out trying to look into this phenomenon where shoplifting has absolutely taken off on British high streets. So highest ever numbers recorded this year, 550,000 incidents recorded. But the British Retail Consortium says that's nowhere near the numbers. They reckon it's more like 20 million. And some of these are kind of violent encounters as well. But there's been a normalisation of shoplifting, which some people are tracing back to 2014 when I think it was offences costing £200 or less were given a kind of a lower status, and it's suddenly taken off. And obviously there's been lots of stuff, cost of living, pandemic and so on, that's happened in the meantime. So a real deep dive into that closer to home. And then lots of funnies. We've got a brilliant butterfly effect. We've got a gorgeous piece of graphic journalism about, I'm sure you'll have seen the story, but there was this amazing discovery in Argentina of this piece of artwork that had been stolen by the Nazis in 1940. And which was rediscovered in Argentina. And so this exquisite, 8-page long graphic story, including an interview with the journalist who uncovered it. So I think it's a nice package. It's a celebratory one. And we've got a Shepherd Fairy cover. So, we have a different artwork on each cover. We've never had any artist on our covers more than once, except for Shepherd Fairy. So he was on issue 1, he was on our 5-year anniversary and our 10-year anniversary edition, and now he's on our 15-year anniversary of Delayed Gratification. And it's a beautiful artwork. It's called Farms Not Factories, and it's absolutely stunning. It's a really nice one to have. We've got a lovely interview with him inside.
Thank you as ever, Rob Orchard there. And the latest issue of Delayed Gratification is out now. Go to slow-journalism.com for more information. We head to Paris now to speak with GQ France head of editorial content, Claire Hazan. She tells us about her latest impressive issue featuring some of France's most important names, from designer Jacquemus to footballer Ousmane Dembélé, and how men's magazines have changed through the years.
I did a lot of different things in my career until now. Before I went to podcast, I was 10 years in publishing already as a journalist or head of content or editor-in-chief. I moved to podcast for 5 years. I was head of podcast at Spotify. I launched the activity in France. I think, the common point between publishing and podcast is really, like, at least for me, my taste and curiosity for new narrative formats and like new forms of storytelling. When I went into podcast in France, it was really the beginning. It was like a blank creative page, and there was such a creative freedom and an excitement of creatives around this format that, that is enough to bring any journalist or producer to this field to try to experiment about new forms of documentary, of fiction. And when it's a blank page like that, you need to be both like mixes like journalism, but production, creative direction, and business or strategy vision, because you are launching a new format and you need all of these elements, and in a very crafty way because it's a small ecosystem at the beginning. So I really love that. And I think that is also what brought me back to publishing after going away for 5 years and coming back, because the field, and it's no secret, of media has very much evolved. I think 10 or 15 years ago, to be a good editor-in-chief, you need to have been a journalist for a long time and have been doing the same single thing. And that's how you get your experience. And I think today it's a field where you can have all those pillars that I mentioned and that I love doing at the same time: journalism, creative direction, business and strategy vision. You cannot run a media without all of those pillars. And people like me who have those different hats are more welcome now, I think, than they were at the time, where people were more asking me, but we don't understand. Are you a creative? Are you a journalist? Are you a business person? What are you doing? What exactly is your professional identity? I think today it's easier and more welcome to mix. And so that's where it makes sense.
You mentioned the word evolving, and and you are the editor of a men's title, and I feel the men's magazines, they had to change actually in the last few years, I would say. Do you see that? I mean, I know you're a newcomer there at GQ France, but how do you see the men's magazine evolution in recent years, and do you think that's positive?
Yeah, I think two things. First, it's good to remind ourselves that men have been leading women's magazine, at least in France, for a long time, and that was never a question. So it must be possible, right? So I mean, we never questioned that. So that's one thing. And I think, masculinity is ever evolving, and that's for the best. The role of a magazine like GQ is to be both like a mirror of that evolution, but also an actor in the way we do it. And I see like two things in the way we move with this evolving masculinity. I think there are two things. GQ very much went from, like, 15 years ago, I was actually a freelance journalist for GQ. So I can tell you before and now. Before, it was very much, here is what you need to do to be a good man or a stylish man. And this is how you should eat. This is how you should dress. This is how you should do your tie. And that was the way not only GQ, but society was. Today, we are more like, here are different options for our readers, and we want to help them like pick and choose what speaks to them. How can they get inspired by different verses of masculinity, and how can they help build their identity and what they feel comfortable with between those different options? So it's more like inspiring, showing what's out there, being at the zeitgeist of everything that's happening, and like helping them pick and choose rather than dictating what should be done.
And I think the issue, perhaps the best define what you just said, is the current one, the December-January, which is the Man of the Year as well. I mean, I think it says already in the title and the people you choose there as well, right?
Yes, I think another movement that goes with that, and something I'm very proud of, with the way we approach MOTI, Man of the Year, is also the mix of personality. Like in the Man of the Year, you have men, you have women, but you have people from fashion, people from sports, people from culture, from internet culture. And I like to see that, for example, the three covers we have in this issue is Jacquemus, but it's also Amin, a streamer, like one of the number one streamers, and Dembélé. And you would think those personalities don't have any links or that those fields don't mix. But today, fashion is in the intersection of so many fields. Like, it's like if we want to make it simple, we say it's a new pop culture. And I like that a brand like GQ can foster all of those personalities around them, that we can put them forward at the same time, and then we gather them in an event and I see everyone mixing, and I really enjoy seeing this mix of people. I think that's where culture and fashion mix when they get better, because they are not in closed circles. And I like that we foster that.
What about the art direction? Because especially in recent covers, there's a lot of kind of a pop of color. I think it's beautiful. So tell us, there's been some little changes in the design here and there as well. I think it's more colorful. It feels very vibrant as well, the magazine.
Thank you. I don't know if we have like theorized that. I'd say, I think, the cover exercise is always difficult. It's a very thin line. We at GQ like put forward famous personalities, what we want to, because that's how the covers are made. But for us, what we want to do is show them in a perspective that is not expected, in a different way. So, for example, my first cover was with Shy, a female rapper. She's been criticized for being too sexy, too masculine, but she's also like breaking the glass ceilings of everything that she's doing. So we pictured her in a very masculine attire, at a momentum that was like super strong for her. So I think it's about like finding the right person, the right way you want to picture them, and at the right moment in the culture. And sometimes it comes out with a lot of color. Yeah, maybe. But, there's different styles, and I think we can experience different things.
And one thing, perhaps we can talk about this GQ in general as well. I know, that there's been changes, of course, as in most publishers in Condé Nast, but let's look at the Man of the Year exhibition. I've seen, other covers from other countries. What I like about it is the GQ fronts, you have kind of local artists or local designers as well. And I think that's quite special. It's not everyone is on the same cover globally. So I think you still very much remain with your, let's say, French identity, right?
We are at a stage, at least at Condé Nast now, where we can get the best of both worlds. Like GQ, and maybe before I came, I had underestimated that. Like GQ is like a very strong international brand, and that's how globally we can get Brad Pitt and George Clooney in a swimming pool and make it a cover that is shared globally, and that is like a superpower. But something else that we all want to do locally is be like reflect really what's cool and what's like going on in our culture, and this can only be done with local stories and local covers. So we shoot, I'd say, like at least maybe 75-80% of our covers locally. And sometimes we all gather together to have a big global tentpole around a big talent that is relevant to all of us. But it's important that we, whether inside or in cover, that we do reflect like local artists. And this community of artists, creative, I like to have them work with us or be featured. Like there are some photographers or stylists that could be working on our covers or on our fashion series, but they could also be, and they are the subject of an article that we are doing. I like the idea that we build this local family of creatives, and that GQ is a platform, whether digital or print, for this like fluidity of work.
Or podcasts.
Oh, podcast, exactly. Yeah.
When you look ahead for 2026, are you excited, about your job, or do you have any exciting plans for GQ France?
Yeah, I'm still super excited because, first year you need to like send strong signals. Everyone is asking what's your first cover rating. So you need to do that, but you also need to lay the ground for more foundational work, how you work with the team, where you're going. So second year is really, we got the basics done. Now we want to continue thinking about exciting projects. Nothing like super precise, but for example, one direction is like our events are like Moti are super well installed, and we're really looking at, can we develop a second strong event, maybe around creativity, maybe around sports? We're really thinking about that because Moti has been there for a long time and we're going to continue, but I think there is room for another event. And what we do well is bring a mix of people around in a festive and culturally impactful event. So I want to like get something else like that.
It's impressive how events kind of define a brand or a magazine, because Man of the Year is so incredibly established. I think that just shows the strength of the title as well, right?
Yes, and that's where also we work with the other countries. Like if you see like the red carpets, they all look alike in the world, but we bring in local personalities. And I think where we know it's a success, when at 2 a.m. you're in the club in the after party and you see the awardees that were at the first part dinner and they're having fun all together, like a comedian,
They're still there.
like a rapper. Yeah, and you're like, okay, the mayonnaise, as we say in French, like really took. And I think this is only something we achieve locally by knowing who we want to bring around. So.
And Claire, one thing sometimes when I visit Paris, I've asked other editors based there, I still think there's a very strong print culture in France. I'm sure there's been challenges like many other countries, but, I still see kind of even weekly magazines, the dailies. I mean, are you as optimistic as I am about the state of print in France?
Yes, we're not going to lie. It's like ever evolving and ever challenging. I think that is also what keeps us excited is because the model keeps switching and we need to evolve at the same time. I think it's a strong print culture in France for two things. One, we're a culture of context, a lot of context. For example, when you compare American culture, French culture, we like to put a lot of context. And for this, you need space, you need a time for your brain that is longer, and print really brings this in. So that is, I think, very relevant to French culture. What changes is the place of print and what kind of print you want to be doing. I think we all know that today a print is something that you want to keep. And so we all tend to do something that is more qualitative, that is going to stay longer on your table, that you want to come to it, leave it, come back to it. So we work towards that kind of like more qualitative objects.
Thank you, Claire Hazan there, and you can buy GQ France in all kiosks in France. To Melbourne now. Let's talk about The Story, a new magazine about writers and anyone who's ever obsessed with a good tale. The title was created by Fireside Agency, and among its writers, it includes Monocle's very own Andrew Mueller. It was a pleasure to speak with The Story's editor-in-chief, Chris Harrigan.
The simplest way to describe it is to say that The Story is a magazine about stories. It's about writers and readers and really anyone who enjoys a good tale, though there's a more complicated explanation. And it's the one that gets me a little tongue-tied, and people slowly start to back away with me at dinner parties when I attempt this version. But for the sake of explaining the title, I might try. And that's to say that The Story is a collection of stories about stories, as meta as that sounds. In all the jobs I've had in my professional life, whether it's been working in magazines or later in life in communications, the main tool that's always been at my disposal has really been storytelling, narrative. And I'd spend all day finding a story and working out how to tell that story. And then I'd come home and tune out the day's work of storytelling by opening another magazine or switching on the TV and try and distract myself with yet another story. And probably in between, I'd be sold something or convinced to think about something a certain way by a publicist or a marketer doing a good job at telling me another story. And so when you think about it, like stories are kind of the main thing we tend to do as a species. And if you're in the writing business, that's all you do.
I understand the meta thing. You have writers telling, how they approach stories as well. In a way, I think our very own Andrew Mueller as well, of course, we both know he wrote a fantastic piece about magazine publishing and what people call it the heyday as well. I think that was a great highlight for the magazine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in our line of work, stories are obviously our stock and trade, but really the idea behind the magazine came from my boss. It was an idea he had a few years ago, and he's a former journalist turned communication strategist. And I was at the time a very recently former magazine writer and editor, and I was trying to give communications a try and being a fan of my work. And he had this idea to start up a publication that would turn the lens of storytelling back in on itself. So how can we tell stories about the art of telling stories and who the people telling stories are, and it becomes the snake eating its tail. So we set out to make a publication. It was actually a website for a little while, also called The Story. And that was great. It was written in the way that the internet often tends to be written, which is to say it's a little bit more, what can a reader expect to get out of this? Can we teach people how to tell better stories? Can we give them tips for including strategies for storytelling in their day-to-day life? And that was great. It was a little bit more meat and potatoes though. And so we had this idea last year, what if we just blew that up entirely and got rid of all the useful elements of telling stories about stories and just went and did the old school thing and chopped down some trees and made a print publication. And instead of it being useful to someone, so they could come away with some tips about incorporating storytelling into their life, we thought, why don't we make it like lean into the weirder elements of storytelling and just sort of really luxuriate in the art and the craft and the commerce and all those things around storytelling.
And it's mentioned, when you read the magazine, I believe in the editor's letters, it didn't want to look like a stuffy literary journal. And I think you succeeded in that because the magazine looks quite vibrant, I have to say, a lot of color, pictures, it's something that is very inviting in that sense, design-wise. Would you say so? So you wanted to avoid kind of this kind of more serious, almost like academic style magazine.
I'm glad you noticed that because we talk about the magazine and we say, it's a bit like a literary journal, except it's really not at all. I was really adamant that we wanted to make this really inviting and creative, and words are just one of the main tools of a storyteller. Like the way that you dress something up visually, the look, the feel, the texture, they're actually doing a lot of heavy lifting, and every page is an opportunity to try something out in terms of artwork and layout and design and typography. And so we went to a really fantastic designer. Her name's Lara Burke. She was the founder and designer of Frankie magazine and also Smith Journal. She was really keen with what we wanted to build, and we really upped the ante. And I think she almost fainted when I said, my vision for this magazine is that every article will be its own opportunity to create a new visual language. And we want the whole thing to feel cohesive and coherent, but I don't want any templates. And I think we want to treat every story, like find out what the essence of the story is and bring that to life with design that's existing just on its own terms. And I think it may have almost killed her, but she did a great job.
And Chris, before we talk about some of the highlights of the latest issue, I just want to talk about perhaps a little bit about the business model. So remind me, so the magazine is created by Fireside Agency, which is not your traditional publisher in that case, right?
Yeah, no, in that sense, we're very much a modern publication. Fireside Agency, where I work, is a communications agency, but it's founded largely by former writers and journalists and magazine makers. We've got Louise Bannister, who helped me make this magazine. She also co-founded Frankie and Smith Journal, which I started my professional life out as an intern, and Lou and Lara were leaving the stage with Frankie Press. So this is kind of a real, we've been reunited in a way on this project. But the business model was, obviously independent publishing is going through some difficult times. And so Lou and I had both stepped away from that being our main job. I honestly, when I left Smith Journal, wasn't sure I'd ever make another magazine. But then Ben Hart, my boss, who founded Fireside Agency, he was doing really well with his communications work, which I also work on. But we just found ourselves, we're creative people, and we just had a hankering to make something, and we missed magazines. And so we thought, maybe we could find a way to blend this into what we do at Fireside, make something really cool, kind of just for the hell of it, because we believe in print, and put it out into the world. And it doesn't really have any KPIs attached to it. I think that's a really nice thing. We haven't had to sell any ads. I mean, the thing is paid for by the other work we do at Fireside. Hopefully, if people appreciate it, that's really all we need it to do.
And if I may say, I think it's a nice addition to the Australian newsstand as well, because I think, even here in Monocle, I think Australia, is a big market for us. But I know in Australia, there's been some closures in recent years of magazines as well. So I think it's, it is good to have kind of a new title over as well, because there's still people that are very much interested to read something like the story.
Well, I really hope so. And early reactions would seem to suggest that's the case. We had a launch party for it here, and people were giving free copies, and they seemed delighted just to have something between their hands that they could flick through. Like, it's a bit of an old trope to say that everyone's just on their phone all the time and they're really eager to get off them. But I do think that's the case.
Give us some highlights. You don't need to tell us everything, but some of the stories on issue one as well. Of course, we spoke about Andrew Muller, of course, that we both know was a great story as well. But give us a little bit extra.
One of the best things about being a magazine editor is you can think back to all the people who inspired you, your heroes, and you can try and get them to be in your magazine, whether they're being they're a subject of a piece or they're writing for you. And A real highlight for me was being able to approach Jesse Pearson, who's the former editor of Vice magazine and has gone on to make his own independent magazine called Apology. And he's one of the reasons I got into magazine making. And I found myself looking for a writer to tackle a subject that was a little bit obscure. We wanted to do a profile on a man named V. Vale, who's one of the earliest punk zine editors. Back in the 70s, he was making zines on a photocopier, and he's still going now, even though he's in his 80s. And I thought maybe I'll ask Jesse if that's up his alley. And it turns out he's been a huge fan, and he got in touch with V and turned the piece in, and that was a real highlight for me. But there are so many others. Andrew Muller's piece, as you mentioned, I've always looked up to him. He's an amazing writer, and he's just had such a storied career. He was really there. If I've come in towards the waning days of print publications, he was there, at least one of the pinnacles. And so asking him to reflect back on what the industry was like, not even 50 years ago when it was really booming, but even just 20, and how stark the difference has been between then and now, I'm always looking for an opportunity to get him to write, because what he can do with a sentence is really magical.
He'll be very happy hearing this. Chris, I just want to, finally, if people want to get hold of a copy, I know there are 3 different covers as well. Can they go to your website? I mean, is it available on the newsstands in Australia? So where people can actually get hold of the story?
We're mostly selling through our website at the moment. It's thestory.bigcartel.com. It's all very lo-fi. We didn't want to spend too much effort putting together a big digital website. We just want to keep it minimal. But we do have stockists, which we'll be developing more of in the new year as well. So you should be able to find us in your local favorite.
Thank you very much, Chris. You can get a copy of the story on thestory.bigcartel.com. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Dewars. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. We're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. And of course, this year you should subscribe to The Stack on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or monocle.com. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.